Hey, loves, I am so excited to be here with you on this very special fertility and true crime episode for the Fearlessly Fertile podcast. Now, you might be thinking, what the hell does true crime, like, how do we match up true crime, fertility, all this other stuff? Well, I'm going to tell you. For those of you that may not remember this, or maybe are new to the podcast and don't know this about me or my husband, but we both have a background in law enforcement, in various aspects of law enforcement. I was a prosecutor in Sonoma County, California for almost 10 years and actually was a junior prosecutor while I was in law school. So I've always been interested in getting the bad guy. And actually, so is my husband with his background. So in today's episode, we are going to be breaking down our take on the Laci Peterson case. Some people call it the Scott Peterson case, but I tend to care more about Laci Peterson than calling this Scott Peterson the piece of shit that he is. But anyway, these are all our opinions. And I also want to make it really clear that our take on this particular crime is solely our opinion, and we have nothing but respect for the families involved in this case. But we're going to be looking at this from a professional standpoint, and the opinions expressed here are solely ours, and that's it. So welcome to the podcast, babe. This is it's such a good thing to have you on it. So why don't you tell the ladies a little bit about your background before we get into the nitty not so gritty of the Laci Peterson case?
Thank you, love. Yes, this has been discussed between us for quite some time. And this is a very intriguing case. We have discussed going deeper and deeper into these things for quite a long time. It's kind of our little guilty pleasure that we like to watch every now and then. And Laci Peterson certainly was in the forefront of our attention many, many years ago. We'll get into that. But as for me, at the time, I was a new police officer. I was a police officer for about 23 years. I was in investigations in a detective capacity or supervisor capacity for somewhere around 9 years. I was in gangs. I was in general crimes. I was in internal affairs. I was on a SWAT team, supervisor SWAT team, did a bunch of other diverse things over the course of that career. And at the beginning of the career in 2000, shortly thereafter, this Laci Peterson case came up, and we were both in certain different parts of our law enforcement career at the time, or career in general.
Yeah, and it's really kind of funny, like, because when we talk about this stuff, like, we always, it's even though there's distance between what we do now and what we did back then, we always, like, immediately, whenever we start talking about this shit, it's always like, oh, what would you have done? What would you have done differently? Or like, can you believe that? Like, it's really interesting because I think a lot of people don't understand that the process, it's not like something you watch on TV. Like, it takes a lot longer to get these crimes investigated. It takes a lot longer to get these things through the system. And there's a lot more technicalities. It doesn't just get, cleaned up in an hour episode.
Yeah. People ask me my opinion on different cases or things that come up. And I have to remind them that the farther down into the justice system a suspect or a defendant gets, the more rights they receive and the more flawless things have to get, from the very first eyewitness of a crime to the judge at the very end of sentencing. They all have to be relatively flawless for a defendant to obtain or for a conviction to be obtained against a defendant. So there's a lot of things that can go wrong along the way, and it frequently does. And sometimes those things can be rehabbed, but sometimes it can't, and the case is gone.
Right. Well, it's also interesting, and I think the reason why we wanted to start with this case is, the ladies listening may not know this, but while I was a prosecutor prosecuting sex crimes, there was a really long stint. It was about an entire year of my career as a prosecutor, about 13 months, where I was knee deep in sex crimes that were being perpetrated against pregnant women.
Right. They're easy targets.
Yeah. I mean, and this was the craziest thing because we were going through our journey at that point, and I was like, it was next level for me to, for us to be going through what we were going through at the same time that I was having to prosecute all these crimes against pregnant women. I was like, why am I, have I become the patron saint of, sex crimes against pregnant women? But now that I look at it, it's like, well, pregnancy was the thing that was forefront on my mind. So I attracted this into my life and into my career. So it's definitely something that I take very seriously. And, having experienced not only this journey, but having prosecuted crimes of domestic violence and sexual assault against pregnant women. And, it's a part of my professional life that I take really seriously. So it makes sense that we would start with this case. But, can you believe that this case is basically almost 22 years old, excuse me.
22 years old. And it's still, for those of you around the world that may not know, I know we've acknowledged and listened to other podcasts and watch other shows. And so it does have some international notoriety. But for those that don't remember, this was a case out of California in 2002 that started on Christmas Eve of all times. And it has still, it's still running its way through the justice system and gets this renewed life in the media. And obviously there's been a couple specials on Netflix and another network.
I think AMC or somebody did another some kind of a documentary on it. But and in preparation for this, it's important that we make shout outs to True Crime Garage, one of my favorite true crime podcasts, as well as Red Handed and the Prosecutors podcast. So you guys need to know that Mr. Austin and I, we actually did our homework on this. We're not just relating back to our memories.
I am hundreds of pages into motions, legal court motions, because whether it's, no disrespect to any other podcast, and we're certainly not going to dive into the deep minutiae here or in the documentaries that we see on television. They just can't cover from the prosecution standpoint nor the defense's standpoint every point and authority that they're trying to make along the way. So I've been just reading like a novel in the background, all the details, just my head constantly exploding with facts that I had never heard before.
Well, and that's the funny thing too. That's the other thing that I thought that we could do an interesting twist on this, because you're right. Like a bunch of fantastic podcasts have done like multiple episode, dissection into this particular case, but we haven't really heard much about, something coming from a cop's standpoint. So I think that's going to be really interesting for the ladies listening, because like some of the biggest consumers of true crime are women.
Yes.
I mean, these podcasts are largely consumed by women. So I'm really excited to be sharing all of this with all of you. So knowing a little bit about our background, as well as the reason why we're doing this, like, let's dive in and just hop to it. Like, and I think we can start with, like, this case has so many aspects of, like, this nail biter. Like, not only did it happen at a time when crimes are not supposed to happen unless it's Home Alone or something like that. I mean, we don't anticipate horrifying murders taking place on Christmas Eve. Like, that's this kind of time of the year that it's only good shit that's supposed to happen. So this is particularly horrifying because it's a time when people are thinking about being with their families, but it's also, you look at Scott and Laci as a couple, they're like cute. Like they're like this cute, perfect, all-American couple that met in college. They got married young, and here they are starting their family. But as we did our research into this, things are not exactly as they seem.
Yes. And if anybody wants to suggest a name for this segment, that's fine. Mine is subjective justice, because I find Scott to be a repulsive pig, to quote my wife. He was demonstrating infidelity prior to their the pregnancy, obviously prior to this incident. And the buildup prior to Christmas Eve with the mistress, and sadly for her, she got swept up in something that she had no idea she was getting involved in because of the con man that is Scott Peterson.
Well, we all know dudes like that. I mean, you're a guy, so you know way more about this.
I've never been around one of these individuals in my life, love.
The whole time you kind of look at him and you're like, what a piece of shit. Like, obviously, I think my perspective on this is coming from, knowing what I know about him. There was some douchiness about him. I think that, we also kind of look at these things, our respective careers before what we do today definitely required us to at least be a little bit better than the average bear in sizing people up. But, he seems very charming and, knew what to say, by all of the research that we've been doing. Like he's kind of, somebody that seemed perfect.
Seemingly, yeah, certainly from a 500-foot view. But when you get up close to him, it seems like he was an absolute dishonest scumbag. The only honest thing he acknowledged that I can recall through this entire matter was that he was where the bodies were found and provided evidence that he was over there as his alibi is actually ultimately what I think is what he tried to use as his alibi is ultimately what puts the nail in the coffin, so to speak.
Yeah. Okay. And so this is also, because as I said earlier, we aren't going to get into every last detail of this case. This is essentially for those of you that don't know, that maybe were living under a rock or outside of the United States, or maybe just weren't paying attention at the time. Essentially, this was the murder of a woman who was 8.5 months pregnant, and her husband was the primary suspect and was later convicted and found guilty.
Right. Laci, let me back up, excuse me. The morning of December 24th, Scott decides in a very, very brief summary that it's too cold to golf and he's going to go fish, which is much warmer than golfing, as we all know.
So crazy. I mean, think about that. Okay, let's just take that piece. Okay, so let's go back and let's say I was 8.5 months pregnant with Asher, and you would suddenly, either on Christmas Eve, you would decide to go golf, but then golfing was too cold. And actually, that's a legitimate thing because the part of California that we lived in around that time, it would actually legitimately be cold. We actually lived in an area that was about an hour outside of where the bodies were found and about 2 hours away from where Scott and Laci lived.
I had dove those bodies with water for bodies and evidence before. So, yes.
Oh, speak more about that. Wait a minute, ladies. I totally, that's right. You did search and recovery.
Yeah, we had the dive team, and there was a homicide where a lady was shot in her bed, and one of the suspects was subsequently located. He acknowledged that he threw a gun into the bay there. And so the dive team went out, and I don't recall, we had found a gun. And so we left, we packed up and we left. And then they realized that wasn't the correct gun. And the tide had gone out. We went back some weeks later, and I got stuck and I couldn't move, and I fell over. And as I was pushing myself up, I pushed down on a metal object to just kind of grip my hand around it and pulled it up and washed it off. And that was the actual gun. So that was the murder weapon. So, okay, so been in that water before. It's terrible.
Wow. Okay. Well, and I don't think it's that clear. It's a dumping ground too, right?
Yes,
that's just obviously
it's tidal pools. Yeah.
So, okay. So going back to the basic timeline here, I can't even imagine that you would consider, golf.
Well, let's look at females at 8.5 months of pregnancy, right? That stage is, many know or will know or have witnessed friends and family go through. It is a tough time to be in that body for those ladies. And not that I can speak for it, but I can watch from a objective standpoint with what you went through and how your body responded. And, with just mere weeks away from giving birth, it wasn't time to be mopping. It wasn't time for fishing, 2 hours away. It wasn't.
Well, and it could be go time at any time at that point. When you're 8.5 months pregnant, you could go into labor arguably at any time.
Right.
And this was her first baby. And what we know is around this time, based on family statements, testimony from her friends at trial, that at this time, Laci was having pain. She had to be escorted home from a yoga class.
She had a couple fainting spells and had gone to the doctor and had said she was known for being a very vigorous walker, and she had discontinued those walks because of her concern and her doctor's concern for her safety that she could fall. She mentioned at one point to a friend or to a doctor that she'd almost fallen in the pool during one of the spells.
Okay, so what we have is December 22nd, 2002. A young woman, I think she was maybe 26 at the time or something
Somewhere
like that.
that
Yeah,
range.
24, 26, because they got married when they were 22. She's preparing to have her baby. Husband up and decides that he's going to go play golf, which I guess he was a golfer. That's not crazy.
He had joined a country club.
Yeah. But what is crazy is the idea that he was going to fucking go fishing 90 minutes away from their house. At least that's what his story was.
Right.
So that absolutely just is weird.
Let's back up and look at the genesis of this fishing story, right? So about a month and a half prior, he is in a bar with some coworkers, and there's another female there who he's making passes at, who testified in court that he was making aggressive passes. She informs him that that she is engaged. And so he moves on to, well, you got to have a friend. So good friend throws poor Amber Fry, the new soon-to-be mistress, to the wolf and introduces Scott Peterson to Amber Fry. And Scott and Amber develop a very quick relationship. First date, stay over, and a couple more sleepovers after that.
And that was in November.
That was in November.
So that was November 2002, excuse me. So like a month-ish before his 8.5-month pregnant wife disappears. Old Scotty is out catting around. And I mean, from multiple accounts, I didn't read this in the transcript or anything like that, but multiple accounts, he's talking crazy to this woman who is engaged and wants to hook up with her. And as you said, gets kind of rebuffed. And then that's how single mom Amber Fry gets into the picture. So
right. And he immediately woos Amber and goes on to tell her, after being confronted by that introducer party there, the lady there that he was trying to get at with the bar, that hey, you've been married before, because he told Amber no, that he hadn't. So he had to rush and tell Amber that he was sorry. He had been married, but he had lost his wife, and it was too painful to talk about. And she forgave him for lying. They spend a magical night together. He makes scampi or something. They go cut a Christmas tree. They go for a hike. And then
it sounds like a Hallmark movie.
Immediately thereafter, this is about the first week of December, he starts researching buying a boat on a Friday, buys the boat on a Sunday, picks it up on a Monday. I believe you had to go to the bank to pick up the money.
That was was that the Monday before?
It was about Monday, somewhere on the 9th or 10th of December.
Okay.
And then immediately begins researching the bay for fishing locations, and not just the bay, but the tides and the currents. And we're just basically a week out from when Laci goes missing. He's buying his obligatory fishing lures, I think a couple of them, a fishing pole and a fishing license, a 2-day fishing license.
I think he bought the 2-day fishing license on December 20th for December 23rd and 24th or something like that.
Yes. In fishing license, typically you fill them out there for the day and the next day, or, the 2 days, the close proximity to when you purchased it. But it seems like he filled it out for a little bit later.
That's freaking crazy, because that means that at least a month before he was involved with another woman and then starts up this fishing craziness. And, I think there's some mention that he had taken Laci out on their first date on a cruise, or like a sea something, where she was sick the whole time. Like, this was not something that he intended to enjoy with his wife. No, she didn't know about it. And our understanding is that nobody knew about the boat, because he didn't keep it at home. He took it to his shop space and parked it in a roll-up garage there. That's so crazy. And there's some allegation that Laci might have known about this boat. But even if
she can't say she didn't at this point.
Yeah, I mean, people can say whatever the hell they want at this point. But whether she did or not, all we are relying on at this point about whether or not she knew that he went fishing is Scott's own statement. Like, we don't have any way. I mean, everyone, I think he had told other members of the family that he was going to go golfing. And I don't think he had told anybody other than his own statement that he was going to go fishing.
The night of Laci's disappearance, he was still telling people that he had gone golfing, even after he had gone on the boat. And then he had told other people at the same time that, oh, I went fishing.
Wait, okay, so let's break that piece down, because here's what we know at this point, ladies, is that it's Christmas Eve, 2002. This young woman who is preparing to give birth, her husband disappears. And we actually don't know at that point when she allegedly disappears, because it's his statement that she disappeared. Because we're going to get into it in a second, but this whole idea that Laci was missing, that did not become a thing, and nobody became aware of that until he raised it.
Right. So that prior evening, the 23rd, they went to her sister's to get Scott's haircut and to get her hair touched up. She was wearing specific khaki maternity clothing,
like maternity pants.
Maternity
they
pants.
Said they were beige or khaki, something like that.
And a maternity shirt. The maternity shirt was later found in the laundry. So that's important for later, that the evening of the 23rd was the last time she was seen or heard from alive by the sister or anybody else for that matter, other than the killer, Scott Peterson. And by the morning of the 24th, around 10 a.m., Laci's mopping the floor.
Allegedly.
And says she's going to go for a walk. She's going to go shopping, which we learned later that she did the shopping the day before, the receipt and the list and all the groceries are accounted for. Scott takes off to go fishing, and Laci's going to go for a walk. He saw her wearing black leggings, and I don't remember the top he described. And he takes off. He goes to the shop. He does some email fax work about an eBay item, if I recall correctly. Grabs the boat and takes off and travels 90 miles to the bay, passing a dozen other bodies of water.
Because that's Stanislaus County.
Stanislaus County. He ultimately drove over and launched in Berkeley area, which would be, I guess, Alameda County. And at that point, he gets a parking pass to park the boat and the truck and the trailer while he's out on the boat at the marina. And he later presents that as an alibi, as evidence of where he was at the time. Laci was out for her walk. He couldn't have been there and accounted for her location at that time.
So at this point, he knows. He's the only one at that point that knows what happened to Laci at that point, because on the 23rd, her family, her sister cut his hair, I think I had heard that she had shown Laci how to do her hair in a different way.
Curling iron.
Yeah, some kind of thing that was a thing back in 2002. But he's doing all of this and nobody knows what's going on. As far as anybody in her family, friends, whatever, they have no clue that on, December 24th, that anything had gone wrong with Laci.
Right. They weren't supposed to show up to her parents until about 6 p.m. that evening. She was supposed to pick up a gift basket that the sister had asked her to do the day before. She had agreed to do that. That gift basket, the seller of the gift basket ultimately called the sister and said, "Hey, are you going to come pick up this gift basket?" And then she started realizing, oh, Laci didn't pick it up. Why? That's really odd. She was, very reliable.
So this is all kind of that kind of stuff was eventually going to signal to the family that something was wrong.
Later in the evening.
Right. But in the morning, Scott was pretty much
to do whatever he wanted.
Yeah. So at this point, it's interesting because, first of all, it was like a 14-foot aluminum boat. Is
15 foot aluminum boat.
Shit you would take out on the bay on December 24th and you ladies have to understand, he wasn't just searching the tides and the currents. Like there was some searches that they found on his computer saying murder, dump body, or like some crazy shit like that. And when they did the forensics on the computer, like there were multiple searches that were like insane. Like nobody would around Christmas time, people are looking on fucking Amazon. They're not like how to chop up my husband or like all that stuff. I mean, seriously.
Yeah, he had zoomed in on the island across the way from ultimately just
do you remember the name of the
Brooks Island?
Brooks Island. Is that Island. Do you know?
Like, no, it's not it's not like Angel or Alcatraz or something else in the bay. It's tiny, small little. And
what he was talking about was closer to Berkeley, the Berkeley Marina. So that's even closer. You're not even in open water at that point.
No, you got a little ways to travel before things get. But I mean, I've driven by there thousands of times, and I mean, I'm not taking a 14-foot aluminum boat out there on Christmas Eve with a pregnant wife at home by myself. That doesn't seem very terribly reasonable.
No, and like if you're trying, because like the other thing that we had heard was that he was trying to say, "Oh, I just wanted to try out my new boat." There's like a dozen bodies of water closer to home,
correct,
that would have been safer,
correct,
for him to test that out. But Mofo went 90 minutes.
Right.
Like,
so he's over there for about an hour and a half, makes the turnaround, calls and leaves these messages on Laci's phone and the home phone that just sound so insanely fake. It makes you want to gag.
Yeah, it is pretty good. Like, and ladies, if you guys want to Google the messages, I think they're readily available online if you want to hear what we're talking about. But it was like over the top, like, "Hey, beautiful," all this stuff. I would be very fucking suspicious if you called me.
I was on my way home with a chainsaw and I was trying to keep you here. Yeah, that's what that message would mean.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like if I got a message from you telling me, "Hey, beautiful," like I'd be like, "What the fuck?"
It's code.
Yeah, I'm like, what is going on? Like, maybe I shouldn't go home. Like, something's up. Or my husband bought a boat, and I'm going to come home. And
perhaps that's what this all was, and we're misunderstanding. Hey, beautiful! I bought a boat. I tried it out on the bay.
So gross. So and the other funny thing though is if you listen, because I think he left 2 messages.
One on her cell and one in the house, I believe.
Right, because one of those messages he said it's 2:15. I'm on, like, whatever. It's like, who calls out the time? I mean, like, there's a fucking timestamp on the message. I mean, maybe that's in and of itself not a big deal, but if you're somebody who's trying to account for time and start creating an alibi, you're going to purposefully do things.
You're marking time.
Yeah. I mean, that kind of start to create this image of, or this storyline for what you're doing. I mean, it's fucking nuts. I mean, to be out fishing anyway.
Well, and I think part of the idea of traveling so far for Scott would be that I was too far away. I all this time is accounted for. You know how long it takes to drive the 90 miles over to Berkeley. I'm out there for 2 hours, parking, unloading, fishing, reloading, turnaround, driving back. I'm gone for hours. Anything could have happened to Laci.
Right. Well, but what the fuck would you be fishing for in that water other than hypodermic needles and zombies? Like,
yeah, there's going to be striper and sturgeon. That's probably about it. They actually had a fishing expert come in and testify at court and say, yeah, the striper and the sturgeon move out of that area. You're not going to catch anything at that time, specifically with lures for freshwater bass fishing.
What? Okay, so I didn't know that. Yeah. Like, so he had the wrong lures.
Correct.
And were they even set up?
That I don't recall.
Okay, because that just seems like... And you and I both know, having grown up in the Bay Area, you ain't eating nothing out of that water.
Well, let's not be offensive. Some people do. It's not, they're mud fish. They're not my, people swear by sturgeon. It's just not my style.
Disgusting.
Maybe elsewhere, down, closer to open water.
The only thing you're going to catch in the Berkeley Bay is either a fucking case or Hep B.
Lead poisoning.
Yeah, I mean, that's just not happening. But anyway, so at this point, Scott Peterson is on his way back. People still don't know that, or, maybe the sister's starting to suspect something because
I don't believe she's got a call at that point.
Yeah.
It was, they had to pick up the basket by 3.
Okay.
So I think at 3:15, the the company called the sister and said, hey, you need to pick this up. And at which point she tried calling Laci, no answer. Tried calling Scott, no answer.
Okay. So he's going from Berkeley to Modesto, California. That's about 90 minutes. Is that what?
90 miles.
90 miles. So maybe an hour and some
Yeah,
change.
you're pulling a trailer.
Yeah. Well, at that point, it's a 14-foot aluminum thing. So, and there's probably not, well, you know what? There's probably a little bit of traffic on Christmas Eve. Probably a little bit of traffic through that Emeryville.
Traveling to grandma's house.
Yeah, all that stuff. So, okay. So he gets home and then he doesn't call 911 to report his wife missing.
He showers, orders a pizza. And even though he ordered a pizza just a very, very short period of time before he was supposed to go to dinner, he gets dressed and then calls parents and says, hey, have you seen Laci? Is Laci over there already? Even though her car's in the driveway and her purse is still present in the house.
Okay, so two things. Number one, I think he also said he drank a glass of milk. What the fuck? Who drinks milk with pizza? Like, that's an indicator that you're a fucking homicidal maniac anyway, but
I can't disagree. You've probably raped and killed before.
Yeah, I mean, that's the only sensible drink that goes along with pizza is fucking root beer. Like, really?
Yeah.
Like, really? He's an animal. So
maybe in other parts of the world, if we're international right now, we could hear some other suggestion to go with pizza, but
yeah. Well, but the other thing about this that is interesting is he, at that point, is controlling the entire narrative.
Right.
Like, nobody knows that she's missing or that something had happened to her. He has all this time from the night before on December 23rd up until whatever time he calls her stepdad to do whatever the fuck he wanted and to create whatever scenario he wanted. And what's interesting about that is, so he gets home, as you said, showers. He even does laundry.
Yeah. The clothes he wore.
Yeah, he washed.
Not the other clothes in the dirty hamper. He doesn't wash those. He just washes the clothes that he wore.
That's so fucking sus.
And he goes on to say that it started raining and his clothes were wet. The detective later felt the jacket he was allegedly wearing during this trip and it was dry. So how did his inner clothes get wet, but his jacket was not? Well, he probably washed evidence off. That's probably what you want to do. Yeah.
Oh, that's so crazy. Okay. So at that point, he calls her stepdad the parents looking for her.
They say, she's not here. Call around. Calls a sister. Sister says, I'll call around. You call around. He then calls 3-ish friends.
But her car's
in his statement to the friends and the family is, have you seen Laci? She's missing.
It's so fucking weird. Like, would you ever, like, Roseanne's missing? Or I can't find her. Or do you guys know where she's at? Or, like, is she with you? That kind of a thing sounds more.
To jump to the affirmative statement of somebody's missing is odd.
Yeah. That seems crazy to me. I mean, and I know that some people are like, that's just, you can blow it off easily and just say, well, that's just the language he uses. But as investigators, as people looking to put a case together, it's those kind of tells that would be kind of catching our...
Yeah, people are producing expressions and statements are coming out that they're not aware of. You know, they're not deliberately choosing that word. They are just saying the honest truth sometimes. And when somebody is missing, that's what you would say. They're missing. If you are unsure about somebody's location, I'm looking for Roseanne. Have you seen her? Did she come over early? Did you pick her up because her car's still here?
Her purse is still here. Her keys are still here.
Which there are some conflicting statements on whether or not conflicting is the wrong term. He's lying every chance he gets. So the detective asks him, is her purse here? I don't know. But then later on, I checked, her cell phone's in the car. I checked earlier, but the keys to the car were in the purse. So he would have had to obtain the keys in the purse to check the car. So he is already slipping into the dishonesty trap of not remembering his own lies.
Okay, so and at this point, so if because we've skipped around a little bit. So the backstory here is that Scott Peterson has a girlfriend, Amber Fry. This is all happening before this, situation with Laci. So he also at the same time was lying to Amber Fry about where he was. I think he said he was going to be, because at that point, like, if he's a single guy who quote unquote lost his wife, that's another strange term of phrase that he was super vague about, even with his girlfriend, that, I lost my wife. But in the meantime, he's telling her that he was going away on some epic.
He's going to Maine to visit his parents for Christmas, and then he was going to go see friends in Paris for New Year's. And then ultimately he was going to take a little bit longer to get back in a later conversation because of business he had to square away in Europe.
So he's basically accounting for all of the time between Christmas and New Year's where he would be expected to be with his married family.
Right.
And also at that point, I think the lies got even more bizarre, like as we go on, but we'll get there. So at this point, when he calls her stepdad and like all the alarm bells are going off and everyone's starting to freak out. Where is Laci? Where did she go? And the family actually had his back. Like her family, Laci Peterson's family, believed this whole thing that Scott was telling them, that he was, I think, did he even tell them at that point that he had gone fishing, or did they find out? I don't remember how they found out.
So at some point he calls law enforcement and a bunch of family. I think family are already there when law enforcement arrive. Scott is, there's a park nearby where she likes to walk. So people start rallying around and, they're walking through the park. One detective starts with patrol officers checking the house. You got to start there and kind of work out, right? You can't just start working in random places outside and work inside.
So, and that's actually a good thing. So as a former investigator, like, explain to these ladies, like, why you would start where
in the home, right? You have an 8.5-month-old pregnant lady. She doesn't have a seedy lifestyle, right? She was a substitute teacher. She just graduated college. They had been business owners before at a small little burger beer joint. And so lifestyle says that she's probably, started at the house. That's where she was last seen. We got to start there. And, sometimes with missing kids, they're hiding in the house, or sometimes with adults, they've packed a bag, they have left a note, whatever the case might be. Or in other cases, there's evidence, something that's out of place, something's amiss. And you go in there and you check the house first. Hey, we're looking for, where's her purse? Where's her phone? Where's her car keys? Her car's here. Okay, so we need to account for certain things. Our clothing items here. We've contacted the friends. We got to get that core out of the way. But the other part of this is that spouses are prime suspects. There's a few categories of suspects, right? And you kind of got to look at lifestyle, right? You look at lifestyle. She's not buying heroin in the bad part of town. She's not flying colors in the bad part of town. She's not a broker of large quantities of narcotics and getting kidnapped and drugged back across the border for the cartel's revenge. So sometimes the simplest answer is the correct answer. Let's start with the spouse, and that's what you have to start with these cases, is the family.
Well, and we've seen some statistics, and some other podcasts have talked about that statistic, that the most, I guess, pregnant women, like the thing that is most dangerous during that time is spousal, like they're exposed to spousal abuse. Women dying during pregnancy is largely due to homicide. Like that was shocking to me. I had no idea that was the case, but it makes perfect sense because you're fairly defenseless at that point.
Right.
Like, especially at 8.5 months pregnant, where, at that point your lung capacity is diminished because your belly has gotten so big. You probably experiencing some swelling in the ankles or edema.
Mobility is diminished.
Yeah. It's like, and the funny thing is both of the cases that I prosecuted were sexual assaults on pregnant women. Both of those women were around that time, 8 to 8.5 months pregnant, which is freaking crazy.
Right. So you have a victim, and the victimology is that she doesn't have a lifestyle that's conducive to external suspects. So you got to start with the close one, and the faster you can eliminate them, cool, great. The better chances are you're going to find the real person. But the real person is generally the first person there. And in this case, ultimately that's what it was.
And it's probably your instinct. Like I think Al Brocchini, the detective for Modesto PD, I think there was some alarm bells going off with that guy, like pretty quick.
Scott's lack of ability to show any emotion, any concern, any compassion was crazy. And as a law enforcement officer, the deliberate indifference that you see from the reporting party / spouse is alarming.
Yeah. I mean, it was funny because I listened to portions of his interview, the very first interview that he did. And I didn't watch the video. The video is available, ladies, if you guys want to watch it. I think you can just Google that. But yeah, it was just business as usual for him. Like, and they were asking him, Al Brocchini, like intentionally, and you probably know this having done thousands of interviews yourself, was intentionally asking him super mundane questions. I would have been like, fucker, let's get out of here. My husband is fucking missing. Like, we need to go and get on with it.
It's real hard to get straight to the point with a family member. I mean, or any reporting party for that matter. It does take a little bit more nuance and finesse. You got to build it up some way. You can't just be like, hey, you reported your wife missing. Where is she, fool? So you can't just go straight to that.
I would. That's also why I was a prosecutor and not an investigator.
Right.
Like I would have just, anyway.
So Detective Bronchini tours the house, snaps some photos. Patrol deputies snap some photos, or patrol officers, excuse me. And then Scott takes him over to the warehouse where the boat is. There's some pictures that are snapped there. I didn't know until recently that there was no lighting in there. So when they got there late that night, the detective had to pull a patrol vehicle up, or his detective vehicle up to the open door and snap pictures using the headlights. So that makes evidence memorialization a little bit more difficult. But
That's
then
so weird.
They go down and talk to Scott at the department at that point.
Well, and everyone has to remember this is 2002.
Right.
So this is before smartphones. This is like, maybe there may have been Blackberries and things like that, but they certainly didn't have the kind of camera.
Common. Yeah.
Yeah. It would have this case would be totally different today in 2024, like with the technology that we have and, texting and, luckily they were able to ping cell towers.
Yes.
To get some idea of his location, but not as sophisticated as what we would have today.
No. I mean, they were able to use the call records and the pings to match up times and locations. And that's certainly huge when that technology started coming out in the early 2000s for us to access. But it took a lot of work and it took time.
So when they are doing the initial investigation, Al Brocchini probably had a sense, like his spidey senses were going about this guy. But from what we understand, is that they continued to look at all possibilities. They looked even at her stepdad. They looked at him as a legitimate possibility. I don't know why that was.
Well, they're going to look at who's unaccounted for. Where were you? You were accounted for. Where were you? Okay, you were accounted for. They're going to do the neighborhood canvass. Anybody see anything? Nobody had seen anything out of the ordinary. And then it gets deep into more, neighbor stuff with neighbor across the way getting burglarized. But
which I think is a red herring.
It is. It absolutely is. I mean, you can say whatever you want when somebody's gone. But the cell phones on that particular matter prove that the family had left after Scott had left the neighborhood.
You mean the Medinas? I think that's what their last name was, is the people that lived across the street, because defenders of Scott Peterson will say, well, I mean, there was 2 of these burglars over there across the street burgling a house. I mean, they could have, but it's a massive stretch to say that burglars would commit the same kind of a crime as a kidnapping and fucking homicide. Those are not the same thing.
Violent criminals will burglarize. Burglar suspects don't always, turn out to be violent criminals.
Well, and these guys had I think from my understanding that they had a long rap sheet for dope and stuff like that. So these guys and I think that there was some information obviously from their own statement that they waited until the family was gone. So why would a criminal wait till a family was gone? Is to not have a confrontation.
Right. Well, they certainly weren't there when the family was there, because the family didn't know about it until 2 days later when they got home.
Right.
And we know when the family left, and we know when Scott Peterson left, and the family left after Scott Peterson.
Yeah, I'd be kind of curious. As if I was reviewing this, I'd be like, well, what connection did they have to the Medinas? Like, was there some dope brother-in-law or something like that would cause them to pick that house or whatever?
It was just at random.
So, in any event, the point being is that people who do those crimes aren't necessarily the same as who would be doing something crazy, like an actual
kidnap and murder of a 8-month-old pregnant.
Yeah. So at this point, the other thing that we know is the family starts to gather up, everyone in the community starting to pay attention.
A real community groundswell arrives, and there's hundreds of people there the next day, is my understanding.
Yeah, trying to find Laci. But this whole time, he's still in contact with his girlfriend, Amber Fry.
Yeah, on his burner phone.
Okay, that's interesting. Can you tell the ladies what a burner phone is?
Yes, it's a second phone that you conceal from anybody else that you don't want to see the bill or the call logs, the records.
It's like a prepaid phone, that kind of a thing?
Yeah.
Okay. So that's interesting. But the other thing is he's also having this like ongoing conversation with her. But at this point, there's at some point early in the investigation where she figures out that the Scott Peterson that's on the TV is the Scott Peterson she's tangled up with.
A friend notifies her because Scott, through this, so let's fast forward and rewind at the same time. Scott doesn't want to be on television. He wants to, quote unquote, make it about Laci. And so he doesn't want to be on television. He doesn't want his face on there. He's at the back of the crowds. The family and the friends are standing in doing the press conferences when the media is alerted and things start really taking off. And he doesn't want any part of it. And so he's using his burner phone from the candlelight vigils and calling Amber and telling her, I love you. I miss you. We're going to have a wonderful future together. And
oh my God.
I can't wait to be there for you and your child.
So fucking scummy. Like, that is so disgusting. So he is calling his side chick from his wife's candlelight vigil.
Correct. Yeah.
Would that alarm you as an investigator, seeing that he's on the fringes? Because you're absolutely right. Like, he would kind of stand in the back and stayed off the camera, because most of the early film that we see is of her mother, Sharon Rocha, and her brother, Brent.
Yeah, there are patterns, right? When you look at other missing spouses or missing children, the parents or the spouse are up there at the front, displaying their emotions and pleading for a safe return or help from the community or, whatever the case might be. And for him to be just emotionless at the back of the crowd, kind of, drifting off and disappearing, is certainly alarming. Yeah. And so, Amber ultimately finds out that there's a Scott Peterson with a missing wife in Modesto, and she's just, 50 miles down the road. So she calls Modesto PD and says, "Hey, is this Scott Peterson the same Scott Peterson that I know?" And they confirm it is. And she's immediately connected with Detective Bronchini. And I think there was a slight disconnect there, but detectives run down and interview her, and bombshell, he's been in a relationship with her for the past month or so.
And they had asked him, right? They had full on, I think in the first interview that Al Bronchini did, he asked if there were any problems in the marriage, and also if he had a girlfriend.
Any third parties in general, right? Yeah, between either Laci or him. And he denied it. And then later in an interview with Diane Sawyer, I told him the first night about Amber.
Fucking moron. Because it's not like they can't contradict him with that. At that point, his full-on narcissistic, lying piece of shit ass is taken over.
Right.
It's also interesting to me at that point because basically Amber decides to cooperate with the investigation and starts recording all of their phone calls.
Right.
So she is somebody who I think in the very beginning people wanted to hate and wanted to be so angry with.
No, you got to stand up and applaud her attitude about this. I mean, she was completely victimized and taken advantage of by a lying con man, and she stood up and did the right thing for the right reasons and was pivotal.
Yeah, I mean, like, because without the evidence that they got from her, I think it would have been even harder for them to prove this case, especially the prosecution's theory that he murdered Laci because of he didn't want a family. Like that was basically their theory. I mean, this is a case that I think this would not have been easy to prosecute because you don't have a ton of physical evidence. It's circumstantial, but people need to hear this straight up. A circumstantial case is just as persuasive as direct evidence.
Right. Just because you have 1,000 pieces of circumstantial evidence and 5 pieces of direct evidence doesn't mean that it's not a strong case.
Yeah.
It's a very strong case.
Well, and we don't always have a ton of direct evidence for things. And, direct evidence for those of you listening might be people's statements. I saw this car go there. That, eyewitness statements are direct evidence, but eyewitness statements are notoriously flawed.
Yeah, I think the physical evidence aspect of, he's got, Laci's blood, or, he was traveling to that location and a stoplight camera caught her, laid in the, Weekend at Bernie's in the bed or something, or in the boat, or whatever the case might be. Those pieces of direct evidence. I can't really, hey, look, we got a picture of Scott driving through this red light and there's a body in the back.
Yeah, which is highly unlikely. So, I don't know what the percentage would be, but tons of cases are circumstantial, but there is a point when you have enough circumstances to get a conviction.
Yes.
And so let's go back. So she's recording these phone calls. He's attending these vigils.
In the meantime, detectives have also GPSed his vehicles and started ultimately down the road of wiretapping his phone to see who he's talking to and what other conversations are taking place. But he's doing this very sophisticated counter surveillance where he's driving to the rental car facility, renting a car, driving it to the Berkeley Marina.
And this is after his wife is missing.
Yes.
Like he is going and renting a car to drive over to the place where he said he went fishing, and the bodies of Laci Peterson and Connor Peterson
will ultimately be located.
Like, who the fuck?
He pulls up, he gets out, he looks, he gets back in the car, immediately drives back, returns the car, gets in his car, and drives away. And he does this multiple times, 5+ times. And he's doing counter surveillance the entire time when he's driving. He's speeding up, he's pulling over on the side of the road, he's taking exits, pulling into gas pumps, driving away, going down dead ends, and turning around because he knows he's being followed.
That is, think about the pathology of somebody who is going to drive, again, 90 miles out of his way to go and sit for 5 minutes to just look out at the bay. Like, what the fuck is that? Like, think about that. Who does that?
Well, according to him, that's where he was. I mean, why would you, if there was something you needed to memorialize, something you were thinking about, and somebody you wanted to think about, or a situation, maybe you would return to that spot. Why would you just go to a place that I've fished a lot of places. I never returned back there for 2 minutes just to look at them and turn around and drive away.
That is fucking creepy. Like, it's really creepy. Like, that's straight up consciousness of guilt at that point. Like going back there and like reminiscing for 2 minutes and then driving.
He can't help himself. He doesn't know these subconscious cues are driving him to just continuously display this odd, guilty behavior.
Yeah, it's so freaking crazy. Well, and then that is even more insane that he is letting the detail that's following him know that it's like this weird, I haven't quite figured out what I think of him, because he's stupid in his behaviors, but he's also like pathological enough to pay attention that they're watching him and cocky enough to be, didn't you say he was clapping his hands like?
Yeah, as he passed one of them in traffic, he was clapping his hands at him, like, and that detective testified it was like as if he was congratulating me for keeping up with him, is what I believe that detective said in court.
Wow, that is super crazy. It's super crazy. Okay, so let's fast forward because he also has this weird conversation. I mean, he's such a fucking piece of shit liar. Like, has this conversation on New Year's Eve or around that time.
New Year's Eve from the Eiffel Tower, where you can hear the people ringing in the new year. And that's the large crowd of 1,000 people in front of his house for the candlelight memorial.
Okay, so he tells Amber he's calling from Paris and that there was a celebration there. And that, but what he was really doing was calling from another candlelight vigil with 1,000 people.
Right.
Wow.
Yeah.
That, and was it around this time that he was already starting to move? Because like they had a nursery set up for baby Connor, and he had already started to move shit out of the.
Well, at some point he sells her car. Within a couple weeks of her going missing, he sells her car.
Okay. So he's not expecting her to come back if he's selling mama's car.
And I think it's within 3 weeks, he's contacting a real estate agent asking how he can sell the house. And when they say that's going to be a problem, he said, well, what if I rent it?
So he's trying to get out of there.
Right.
Well, and then he also moves some, like, just a bunch of crap into the nursery. So he's kind of already made.
This is before the bodies are located.
So he's already not expecting anyone to come home at that point.
Well, he knows they're not coming home. He put them there.
Yes. It's so crazy when you think about this. I mean, when you look at all this evidence, and like, I think.
Let's look at a couple pieces of evidence, right? That we've talked about before. So the boat, right? He has this boat that nobody knows about, and the defense has made a big thing about, we can't stand in a boat and throw a body out. We've tried it. We capsized and sunk the boat a bunch of times.
Which is utter garbage because the guy was 130 pounds and Scott was around 200 pounds.
But there's a boat that Laci doesn't know about, and there's a pair of pliers in the boat that have Laci's hair wrapped up in the pliers. So this is a boat that she doesn't know about. She's never seen. He's only had for a couple weeks. And I defy any woman out there, please go look in your husband's tool bench if he has that or something. Go out to my toolbox, love, and find your hair. It's not reasonable.
No.
And so there were a couple strands of hair wrapped up in these needle nose pliers. Yeah.
Fucking and found in the boat.
Found in the boat. Obviously, fast forwarding a little bit, his wonderful marina parking pay pass that he used to prove his alibi where he was is where the bodies show up.
Yeah, that's so insane. Well, and then he also started engaging in really strange behavior in addition to trying to selling his wife's car. I mean, and trying to sell his house. We also know that he started making his way farther down south in California. Now, obviously or maybe not so obviously, but his family lived down in the San Diego area. So he was slowly making his way down there. And what was, this is like law school 101, consciousness of guilt, kind of evidence. He bleaches his hair.
And his hair and his goatee. And he grows a goatee because he didn't have that. Yeah.
Yeah. And then is found in 30 miles or so from the Mexican border, driving a brand new car, $15,000 in cash, bleached hair, bleached goatee. He had like Viagra and sleeping pills as well as freaking snorkel gear. Like
after the bodies had been found, but prior to the positive identification being made.
Right.
So he knew what the identification was going to be, and he was southbound down.
Right. Exactly. So so we're going, I apologize, ladies, we're all over the place, but we're super excited about this. So let's go back to a critical piece of information here. So I think it was it March or April? I think it was like, because Laci allegedly goes missing in December. They find the bodies March or April
Right.
in 2003.
Correct.
The bodies had washed up in exactly the area, according to the way that the tides would have gone. That
Which they prosecutors hire an expert and say, hey, look, what would it be plausible for bodies from this area? Where did these bodies come from, according to the tide maps and tables and currents and all that sort of stuff, based on the past 90 to 120 days of weather conditions and water conditions.
Right. So he puts himself by his own statement and then so this isn't just, this is corroborated by other things.
And then his wife and unborn child are found within a couple hundred yards of where he said he was.
Right. And there had been a storm, I guess, the shortly before their bodies washed up, which would have moved them from wherever. So Brooks Island. So they are found pretty close to Berkeley, washed up on the shore. And what's interesting about that, and this is possibly macabre, so if you want to fast forward, past this, but this is the way it is. I mean, the way that her body was found was consistent with somebody who had been weighed down by some kind of weights, anchors. And we know that he made anchors. He admitted to making anchors.
And there's physical evidence of anchors being made in the shop where the boat was kept. Yeah.
Right, because the condition of her body was such that her head was missing, her lower arms were missing, and then I think one of her legs. So it was just a female torso that was found. And
for the callback to the evidence and witness statements from the night before, she was found wearing those khaki maternity pants that she was wearing from the night before. Not black leggings like Scott had said she was wearing to go for her walk and while she was mopping the floor. And she was not wearing a top, but she was wearing a maternity bra. The top was photographed in the dirty clothes hamper when detectives and law enforcement went through the house the very first night. So that top had been taken off, but nothing else she was wearing from the night of the 23rd had been taken off.
That is so crazy then. So, what the fuck did he do? I think we have our ideas about what might have happened there because there was no physical evidence found at the house that he must have smothered or strangled her because there was no...
Yeah, he had a gun and it was seized the night of the initial reporting. But there's much more to a crime scene with a gunshot or with any, more gory physical violence.
Well, and they probably didn't GSR or gunshot residue his hands at that point because there was no evidence of a shooting inside of the house. There's no blood spatter or anything like that.
No call of a neighbor saying, I heard a gunshot or nothing that would show that that would need to take place. And ultimately the gun, for a firearms expert, was determined that hadn't been fired in a long time.
So at that point, when the bodies are found, she's wearing clothes, at least the pants, that she had been reported wearing the night before on the 23rd.
Correct. Yeah. And the sister was able, through incredible investigative and detective work, the detectives obviously have the tag of the clothing she's wearing. They contact loss prevention of that company, provide them with a stock number from the clothing, and that loss prevention individual from the company is able to cross-reference Laci's purchases. She only had 2 from this company and exactly what they were. And the sister was able to verify that's what she was wearing when she came to the salon the night before. She picked out the shoes, the pants, the shirt. Yeah.
So that means he must have, this whole ruse that she was kidnapped or got lost. None of that shit fucking happened at that point. I know that there were some neighbors that came up and said, oh, we thought we saw a pregnant woman, but not a damn one of them testified at trial.
No, they actually testified that it was another lady. And they found that another pregnant lady.
Yeah. So, and plus he had an excellent defense team. Mark Garagos would not have forgotten to call an army of people that could have cast doubt on whether or not that was Laci. But flat out, it was not Laci. Laci was never home mopping. She was never out walking the dog. None of that shit happened. So I think it's fair to say, at least our opinion and our, surmising based on the evidence that he must have killed her the night before.
Right. Yeah. And why? It either the premeditated or it was something that may have been hastened because maybe maybe Laci did find out something about Amber.
Well, there was some evidence that there was some infidelity. Like she knew of his previous infidelity.
Yeah, he goes on to say that Laci knew that Amber was present in the life and she was cool with it.
That's bullshit.
Right?
It's total freaking
the
bullshit.
pregnant lady is just as cool as a cucumber. We're good with this other girl. Don't trip, Scott. I know you. I mean, it's his lies compound, and that coupled with the one bit of truth he said as to where he was actually puts him where he was and what he did
in the Berkeley
Marina, where ultimately
the bodies were found.
Yeah,
it's so freaking insane. Like you think to yourself, okay, so this guy's driving around with the body of his pregnant wife in a 14-foot fishing boat on Christmas Eve, disposing of her body and his unborn son's body in the freaking bay. And like it's just heartbreaking. I mean, it's heartbreaking when you think of this from Laci's perspective, because the other piece of information, and I don't recall if this came from Sharon Rocha's book for Laci.
The mother.
Yeah, the mother of Laci Peterson. But she apparently only, like, her fertility was, not like something that they took for granted. She had like one fallopian tube. So Laci was really excited to have this baby, really excited to have a family. It wasn't easy, but it did happen. And you think to yourself, like, why the fuck did he have to murder her? Like, just get a freaking divorce, dude. Like, but I think that goes to the heinous nature of this crime. Not just because of who it involved, but like, think about what you had to do. Like, to be in a 14-foot fishing boat in the Berkeley Marina on Christmas Eve, tossing your wife over the side with some anchors attached to her.
Yeah, it's nuts. I mean, your complete detachment from any sort of feeling at that point. I mean, you're throwing an anchor overboard, and that's probably all it felt like to him. Just an anchor at that point. And that anchor's out of his boat, out of his life. It was metaphorical and actually physical. And away he went to, con the next one and the next one and the next one. He's probably doing it still in prison too. Probably got an army of idiots that ride him and fall in love with him. And anyway,
I think that's a reality that the women listening may not be aware of, is that like he's probably like pulling, all this attention that people would have never thought.
There's pen pal groups for prisoners, and they meet and they get married in prison, or they get married when they get out of prison. Yeah, there's no doubt in my mind that he's bamboozling the next 50 women from prison via letters and phone calls.
Yeah, I mean, it's just shocking. I mean, the whole thing. And then, he gets arrested down south near San Diego or La Jolla. Yeah, wherever they're from. They bring him up, and then they're starting to prepare for trial. And the trial went on for like 5 months. I mean, there's all kinds of irregularities that went on with the jury and all this other stuff that, if you're really that interested, you can go and listen to one of the other podcasts we reference, and they'll go into more detail. But I mean, it's just the entire process. I mean, no matter how you cut it, like, you look at this case and it's insane.
Well, I think the scrutiny is a testament to how well law enforcement did in this case. And yeah, there was an error. He was supposed to get a death penalty. California was, waffling about death penalty and stuff like that. Ultimately, that was overturned because they said they dismissed somebody who was against the death penalty off the jury to make that decision. So there has been a lot of scrutiny.
Yeah, I mean, in this case, is 22 years old. So he went through the appeals process, multiple appeals processes. That there's an automatic appeal process when somebody is sentenced to death in California. I mean, nobody dies in California if you're on death row.
It's better he's not on death row.
Yeah.
I mean, death row, you get your own room, you get a TV, you make calls. It's pathetic. But when you are off death row, you're in protective custody. You're in your cell for, I think, 23 hours a day. You get your 1 hour in the yard by yourself to walk around. Or there's a PC yard. It just depends on what San Quentin's setup is. But yeah, I mean, talking to people in the courthouse back in the day, one particular individual that we both know that represented Richard Allen Davis from the Polly Klaas case said he would frequently get calls from Richard Allen Davis. This was, years after that conviction. He's sitting on death row, and that particular defense attorney had purchased that disgusting suspect a television for his birthday. That's how close they had become. So there's odd relationships that develop out of these situations. So yeah.
Well, the good news is that, he was in this case. I mean, people will want to pick this apart. I mean, he's currently up on appeal again, seeking
the Innocence Project out of Southern California, I believe.
Yeah, it's not the National Innocence Project. It's a local to LA.
I think his sister got her law degree to further this. I mean, because he has just destroyed his family's life. So why not run them down this path even farther with your lies? Because you are disgusting.
Yeah, no, it's hideous. Well, but now this case has gotten a lot more attention now that it's 20 plus years old. Two documentaries that we're aware of. I think the documentary on Netflix that we looked at for this is fairly decent. I think they omitted
so much, and I get it. They only have so much time. The last motion that I looked from the prosecutor's perspective, I think was, with all the references, was like 400 pages. So there's a lot of detail, a lot of witness statements, a lot of interviews to be had, a lot of workup. But again, I think with that much scrutiny, to not have this case overturned or thrown out prior to getting to trial, or all the different ways that things can get messed up. And obviously there was a mess up by a judge, and that got changed. And that's what the justice system's for. I'm not saying the justice system's perfect, but the defendant gets so many rights as we go through. And I know you spend a lot of time defending victims or advocating for victims and helping them along the way, that it's tough to see so much attention brought to the school shooter and their name, or the suspect and what they're, it's so terrible what they're going through. That dude should be dead, and I'd be fine with that.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's, when I found out that this case was up on appeal again, because I think they did try to play the satanic cult card. Oh
yeah, the old mysterious satanic cult.
Yeah, which
plagues the world.
Yeah, it's fucking ridiculous. I mean, I guess Mark Garagos had pointed out that there were 7 other pregnant women that had gone missing in that area, but I don't recall what the time frame was, but there was no indication whatsoever in the pathology.
I bet a bunch went missing after this. They're like, shit, my fucking husband's going to kill me. I'm getting out of here.
Right.
Yeah, I'd leave too.
Yeah, I mean, but there was just no basis for that. I mean, when you look at, if somebody was actually going to engage in some pagan ritual, there's a lot of other shit that would have happened. There was no indication that.
Well, when has that ever happened? How many husbands have killed their wives?
Lots.
And how many pagan rituals have we seen?
Not that many.
Okay, I watched Dragnet, the movie, back in the day, and they were running around with.
I mean, that's for another episode, because that shit does happen. Satanic ritual abuse does happen, but not in this case. There were too many other things, or too many other motives. I mean, what's the likelihood that some satanic cult was like, hey, we're going to go frame Scott Peterson, so let's line up our satanic ritual with this guy.
Yeah, we followed him fishing.
Yeah,
and we know where he is, so we know exactly where to put the body. It's nonsense, absolute nonsense.
Yeah, this whole thing is heartbreaking, but it's also just fascinating when you look at how devious people can be and how toxic relationships.
Do you ever look across the table and wonder what I'm thinking?
I know that satanic ritual abuse is probably not part of that. I do wonder what you're thinking a lot, but it's not because I think you might kill me or
I'm on a ladder, with.
You're more likely to hurt yourself doing, DIY home projects
many times.
Yeah. So it's interesting. I mean, I'll be interested to see what how this case is disposed of finally. I'd be surprised that there would be a new trial granted at this point in time with this alleged new evidence. I think they're also going after one of the jurors. They said that one of the jurors misrepresented herself or something, but I don't think that's enough to overturn a case, because you would have to say that the evidence was so flawed that this warrants a completely new trial. I mean, I don't think, and I think for the ladies listening, I think they're saying that one of the jurors had misrepresented if she had ever been involved in a criminal action before, and she had failed to disclose that on her jurors sheet that they give you, the questionnaire. And I just don't think, I mean, having tried a bunch of cases myself, like, I just don't think she said that she hadn't, but what she had been involved in was more of a civil matter than a criminal matter. So it's kind of a technicality, but I'd be very surprised that, one, they somehow found new evidence that would link the murder of Laci and Connor Peterson to a satanic cult or some other criminal endeavor, but that, two, that somehow whatever the juror did misrepresent on her questionnaire would have been so deleterious to this case that it warrants a new trial. I think it's just another way for Scott to just get more attention.
Yes.
And for him to try to control the narrative again from behind the walls of whatever maximum security prison he's at.
Yeah. Yeah, I think he's a master manipulator. And so anytime he didn't get the attention he really truly wanted when Laci was missing, no doubt, because he had to conceal his identity from Amber, who was just down the road. And no doubt somebody she knew would watch the local news. I mean, that was one of even the funny ones. There was a fax that Amber sent of a photo they had taken at Christmas, at a Christmas party. And he asked the detective, is that supposed to be me?
Like, and he was trying to deny that it was him.
Trying
it was so
to deny that it was him in the picture with Amber.
What a sick pig. I mean, he was also, like, after Laci went missing, he got the Playboy channel. And then when that wasn't enough, he, like, upped to some hardcore porn channel. And, like, I mean,
is there a moral to all of what we're doing? Or are we just...
what would the moral be from your perspective? Like, what would you want the women listening to take away from this, other than this is just a little bit of self-indulgence, and we talk about this stuff, and it's a little bit of a callback to who we once were and what we once did. And we still have that interest, but obviously the pregnancy is the nexus, and we want to protect pregnant women.
Yeah, when we got those ladies pregnant out there, you got to be aware. Pregnant women can be targets, internal and external of the home.
Yeah,
and just
but we don't live in fear, ladies.
Something to be mindful of, that we're going to be strong and aware and awake to what we're doing and
certain realities.
Yeah, certain realities.
Well, yeah, and that's the other thing is, like, if you're thinking about looking down the road on how you can protect yourself, protect your family, just be aware of your circumstances. And, if something doesn't feel right in your relationship, be aware of it. I mean, some people don't want to believe that their partner, and trust me, this is not some grand statement to start suspecting your man now of homicide.
I was a little concerned about having this conversation with you, love. I didn't want to be the next suspect.
Yeah, no, but I think there's certain realities that, you're working so hard on this journey, to have this baby,
he made it pretty clear that he didn't want a baby.
Yeah.
From before. And she did. And even into his relationship with Amber, he said he was going to go get a vasectomy, and Amber was upset about that. He said, I don't need a baby. I'll take care of yours. He made it very clear from the beginning with Laci and Amber that he was not interested in having a child.
Yeah. So I guess maybe if your man's telling you he doesn't want a child at all,
listen to it.
Yeah. So I don't know what the moral of that part is, but look, at the end of the day, it's our compassion for victims of crime. I think it's our curiosity about the system, having once been part of the system, but also just a general love of women's issues and women and families being safe, that, we bring attention to these things. And it's also, a way of honoring that memory of, these very real human beings that were involved in this case that
If lady victims of violent crime were out there, what would they say is, they'd want to educate other women on, not being a victim.
Yeah. Yeah. So, well, I think that's all we had on this. And, maybe this will spark some interest in this case and get women to educate themselves and give themselves a chance to learn a little bit more about this. And, if something's not right in your relationship, to be aware of it. We're not saying to go and accuse your man, but hey.
Don't start watching true crime and looking at your husband.
Yeah, exactly. But
well, it gives you an opportunity to recall some of your prior endeavors and a little bit of a break from, you talk to a lot of ladies, and that's a wonderful thing. But I'm sure that
we're having a non-fertility related conversation right now. Right. So,
yeah.
Well, we certainly hope that all of you listening enjoyed this little detour from our normally scheduled programming. And if you're a true crime fan, or, if you're starting down that road, Mazel tov. I hope that you enjoy this and just take a little bit of the Austin's perspective on a very
subjective justice
that
not so subjective that we couldn't objectively analyze another case, but this one, our minds were made up.
Yeah, our minds are pretty made up. But hey, you know what? Good for Scott Peterson. The case, the facts in this case are strong enough to withstand an appeal. Mm-hmm. And hey, if there's evidence that points to somebody else, then our commitment to justice includes the consideration of that.
He's still
a
scumbag. But that doesn't change that fact. But hey, look, if there's another suspect out there, let's hang that.
Exactly.
Well, thanks for the invite, love.
Well, I thought this was fun. I think we're going to do it again. All right, ladies. See you soon.
Love you.
Love you.
Love this episode of the Fearlessly Fertile podcast? Subscribe now and leave an awesome review. Remember, the desire in your heart to be a mom is there because it was meant for you. When it comes to your dreams, keep saying hell yes.